In this video, we're going to take a look at the built-in function print and start introducing strings of data using both single and double quotes. Now, the print function is one of many of the built-in functions that are part of the Python language, and it enables you to specify some data that you would like to display in your command line. Now I'm going to go ahead and start once again a new IPython session. I'm still working from the Chapter 2 or Lesson 2 folder in this case. So far we're still working in IPython interactive mode, but eventually we'll use some of the files in that folder. And again, what we want to do here is introduce the print function. So for example, I can type the word print, which is the name of the function. Every function that you call has a set of parentheses wrapping around its arguments. And let's say we wanted to display welcome to Python, which is a typical way that we start our programming language textbooks, just with a welcome display. So if I go ahead and execute this, it's going to call the print function, and the result will be to display what's in between. Whoops, I missed a end quote there, so that would have given me an error. So it's going to display the characters inside the single quotes. So single quotes are one way to delimit a string of characters in Python. When I press enter, notice that it displays that text. Notice that it does so without the single quotes, and also notice that it did not provide me with an out followed by a set of square brackets containing 1. When you evaluate expressions in IPython, it will show an out that contains the value of the expression. When you print results in IPython, it will simply display whatever you told it to print. In this case, the words "Welcome to Python" followed by an exclamation point. Now, in Python, there are several ways to represent strings. I'm going to go ahead and replace our single quote characters with double quote characters here, which is the typical way to delimit strings in most C-based programming languages. And I'll go ahead and execute that again just to show you that we get the exact same result. So you can use single quotes or double quotes to wrap string contents in Python, and as you'll see shortly, there are other ways to represent strings in Python as well. Now, the print function typically is going to take whatever argument you give it and display that in a string-based representation. So if I were to give it a number, it will display the characters that represent that number. So if I say to print 10, it'll display the number 10. It's just going to be the characters 1 and 0, and it'll look like the integer value 10 when we display it. And similarly, as we get into more complex types in Python, it will figure out a string representation for that type and display that string representation. And as you'll see, when we eventually get to the point of creating our own types in Python, you can define your own custom string representations as well. Now, the print function is relatively flexible. You can actually give it a comma separated list of strings, and it will go ahead and display all of those values. In fact, it doesn't have to be only strings. You can give it a comma separated list of values, period, and it will display all the values that you give it. So in this case, I'm giving it 3 separate single quoted strings: the word welcome, the word to, and the word Python followed by an exclamation point. And by default, when you separate items with commas, they will be displayed on the same line of output with a single space character separating each value from the next. So as you can see, by printing out 3 separate strings, we still get the exact same output as we saw up above. Now, many of you are probably coming from other programming languages, and in C-based programming languages in particular, you'd probably be familiar with the concept of an escape sequence. Let's go ahead and demonstrate what I'm talking about here. We're going to once again display welcome to Python programming, but in this case, whoops, we're going to use new line characters to place breaks in between the words that we're displaying. So whoops, I'm a terrible typist while I'm talking, so I apologize for that. So in this case, by the way, one thing I haven't noticed or I haven't pointed out yet is the different coloring that's happening here. IPython is syntax coloring all of the code. So the word print being a built-in function shows up in green. Strings show up in this color that you see here. You can see within the string that the \n, which is the new line escape sequence, is showing up in bold to emphasize that it's an escape sequence, and you'll see other colors showing up in your code in IPython as well. And these may not match up exactly with what you'll see, for example, if you're using a Python integrated development environment to develop code. Each IDE will often have its own code coloring scheme and even allow you to customize that as well. So what we're saying here is to display welcome, then drop the cursor to the next line, then display to, then drop the cursor to the next line and again to the next line after that, which will effectively skip a line, and then display Python. And by the way, print automatically outputs a new line character at the end of each item that you display. So in this case, it's just adding a new line character at the end of welcome to Python. Same thing here. In this case, it's after the last item that gets displayed, it outputs a new line, which is why we're getting these blank lines here in the interactive IPython session. So if I go ahead and press enter to execute this last statement, you can see that we get 4 lines of output, one of which is a blank line, which was produced by having 2 new line characters back to back. Now when you're inside the body of a string and you have a / character followed immediately by another character, that is an escape sequence, and there are a number of escape sequences available to you. Here is a table of some of them. So here we have the new line escape sequence, which moves the output cursor to the next line. The tab escape sequence is going to horizontally move the cursor to the right, or if you're in a right to left language environment, to the left. If you ever needed to display a / character, you would put 2 backslashes next to one another, because the first one is always considered to be the escape sequence initiator, if you will. It introduces the escape sequence. And if you're working in a double quoted string, you can put a double quote within that string by using / double quote. If you're working in a single quoted string, you can put a single quote within that string by using / single quote as well. So let me switch back over to my IPython session here, and the / character is not only used in Python to introduce escape sequences, it's also the line continuation character, which enables you to have long lines of code that are split across multiple lines when you're typing them in, either in IPython interactive mode or in a script, as you'll see in later examples as well. Now, Python is very strict about the formatting of your code, as you're going to start to see later on in this lesson. And in general, statements need to be on one line of code. However, if you're a programmer, you know that sometimes statements can get to be really long, and for that reason we want to demonstrate this concept of the line continuation character. So let's say that we want to output a lengthier string. This is a longer string, so and now I'm going to put in a \. Now this \ is not going to be followed immediately by another character, which is an indication to the Python interpreter that the statement is going to continue on the next line. Now when you're entering multi-line statements in IPython, it gives you this continuation prompt to indicate that the statement is not yet complete. So we can continue typing our string. Sorry. And I'll finish up the statement by closing the parentheses on my print function call. By the way, let me remove that parenthesis for a moment. Notice that as I type the right parenthesis, the left parenthesis gets highlighted, and this is to help you make sure that you have the correct number of parentheses overall. Each opening left parenthesis must have a closing right parenthesis associated with it in a function call, and this helps you make sure that you match them up correctly. So when I go ahead and execute this, you can see it prints out one line of text. So basically what's happening here is this line continuation character is ignoring the fact that I broke the entire string over 2 lines, and it's connecting it back together as a single line of text. It's reassembling it, if you will. And then finally, the last thing I want to show you in this video is the fact that you can use print to display the values of expressions that need to be further evaluated. So for example, I could go ahead and print sum is, and let's say I want to display the sum of 7 and 3. So that's an expression that needs to be evaluated. Before the print function is called, the interpreter will calculate 7 plus 3, and then it will give both the string sum is and the value 10 to the print function, which in turn will display the sum of the numbers 7 and 3, which of course is 10.